Welcome to CYBERUK 2021 online in our new virtual environment. Before we get started on the main agenda, I'm going to take you through how the event will work. We have a full programme each day with an exciting lineup of speakers. There are a wide range of keynotes and panel sessions, as well as some deeper dives into some of this year's key themes. Many of our sessions will be live and broadcast to you from our CYBERUK studio, and some have been pre-recorded to allow for contributions from a wide range of speakers. The full agenda can be seen on the NCSE website, and we'll also be putting up announcements throughout the day to tell you what's coming up. You can navigate the content on the YouTube channel, choosing from our live spotlighted sessions, on-demand videos, and contributions from our sponsors. Content will also be available to watch back on this channel for 3 months post-event. We have enabled auto captioning on all YouTube videos, so where available, you will be able to toggle this on or off. To turn on closed captions, click the gear icon in the play bar. Click Subtitles, then English auto-generated. And please note, as captioning is auto-generated by YouTube's speech-to-text system, grammatical and spelling errors may occur. The NCSE takes no responsibility for the content and accuracy of the captions. All of our main keynotes and panels will also have a British Sign Language interpreter visible in the window in the corner of your screen. Join in the conversation and spread the word. We welcome your interaction with the sessions, so if you have comments, feedback, or want to reach out to others in the event community, please do so using the channel comments facility or connect with us on Twitter or LinkedIn. Each day we are running dedicated Q&A sessions on Twitter. For day 1, this will take place in the morning and will be dedicated to our session on supporting the development of secure connected places. And for day 2, this will take place in the afternoon for a session on ransomware, the risks to schools and the ways to prevent it. Please submit your questions via Twitter or the YouTube channel chat, and our expert speakers will be on hand to reply. When asking questions or leaving comments, don't forget to tag us or use the event hashtags. Please be polite with your comments. As organisers of this event, the National Cybersecurity Centre is dedicated to providing a positive learning experience for all. We are all therefore expected to conduct ourselves appropriately in accordance with the CYBERUK Code of Conduct, which you can find on our website. The NCSE reserves the right to remove and block any users who are found leaving rude, offensive, or inappropriate comments. So all that remains is for me to wish you a great event. I look forward to hearing your feedback and seeing many of you again in person in Wales next year. Thank you.
Welcome, I'm Lindy Cameron, CEO of the National Cybersecurity Centre, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to the NCSC's flagship event, CYBERUK. I'm speaking to you live from our headquarters here in Nova in Victoria, London, but most of you will be watching from home. And of course, we'd really love you to be with us here in person. When my predecessor, Kieran Martin, handed over to me, he was clear that the NCSC's role in convening this amazing collection of partners, private and public sector, UK and international, was one of the most important parts of the role. And there's nothing I'd like more than to be meeting you all in person. And I promise we will when we host next year's event in Newport, Wales. But like the rest of the country, we've had to change the way we live and work in the last year. So we're really excited to be bringing you CYBERUK virtually for the first time, making the most of the opportunity to try something different. And I'm hugely grateful to both my team and our sponsors for making this possible. You'll see we're bringing you a mixture of live panels and pre-recorded sessions, many filmed from people's homes, as we continue to deliver during the pandemic. This also means that CYBERUK is available to a global audience, streaming the core content on YouTube, allowing people across the UK and the world to benefit from our world-leading speakers' expertise. Because for the NCSC and the wider cybersecurity community, the pandemic hasn't just been about changing our own ways of working. That sudden, extraordinary shift to living and working from home more than a year ago has changed the cybersecurity threats we face and shown the increasingly vital role that technology plays in all of our lives, both professionally and socially. This makes the NCSC's mission to make the UK the safest place to live and work online more important, more challenging, and more central to our security and prosperity than ever. So CYBERUK 2021 will focus on building a resilient and prosperous UK as we emerge from the pandemic, conscious that we are lucky to be able to look forward as others are still gripped by COVID. We will look at how technology has been such a force for good during the pandemic and the challenges that increased reliance brings. It will help us to identify, discuss, and prepare for the challenges that lie ahead, from dealing with the increased threat of ransomware to ensuring that we maximise the benefit of the technology behind connected places. We've assembled a fantastic array of speakers and panellists from across the UK and the world. I'm delighted we'll be hosting Director of GCHQ and my boss, Jeremy Fleming, the CEO of SolarWinds, Sudhakar Ramakrishna, the Home Secretary, the Right Honourable Priti Patel, the Foreign Secretary and First Secretary of State, the Right Honourable Dominic Raab, and Neuberger, US Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technology, and her opposite number, UK Deputy National Security Advisor Beth Seisland, alongside many other excellent contributors. I'm also particularly grateful to our two lead sponsors, Microsoft and the NCC Group, to our three stream sponsors, BAE Systems, Palo Alto Networks, and UK Cloud X, as well as the sponsors of each of our on-demand sessions who've all made this conference possible. So first, a few words on each of our key themes: resilience, technology, and threat. As you know, building resilience is at the heart of our approach to cybersecurity, so it won't come as a surprise that it's a core theme of this year's CYBERUK. This week, we released our fourth Active Cyber Defence report. It shows a 15-fold increase in takedowns last year, showing how our work to protect the UK from online attacks helped people embrace technology's potential. At a time when people were more reliant on technology for work or social purposes than ever before, the NCSC took down 700,000 online scams, 1.4 million URLs, including numerous attempts by cybercriminals to imitate the NHS or use COVID as a lure. We stepped up to ensure the health sector, including NHS trusts, researchers and the vaccine supply chain, were protected. And we did so by over 5.5 million reports to our suspicious email reporting service, 80,000 of which flagged scams we hadn't previously seen. So thank you to the British public for that help. We always say that cybersecurity is a team sport and the team just got a lot bigger. But we can't be complacent. The Colonial Pipeline hack in the last few days has illustrated this beyond doubt. There is much still to be done, and that's why I hope that resilience will be a key theme of the new National Cyber Strategy, as flagged in the integrated review just published. But we can't just focus on today's challenges. We also need to anticipate and get in front of future challenges. We want to build security into the next generation of consumer devices and technology. We want to help local authorities make the most of connected places technology, factoring in privacy and security, not just value for money and impact. We'll be discussing the potential of quantum, the opportunities for innovation, and the potential for international and industrial collaboration. And finally, after resilience and technology, we'll be discussing cyber threats. I'm really proud of the way that the National Cybersecurity Centre has helped to manage key incidents here in the UK, and I'm a keen observer of the way the new Biden administration in the US is reshaping itself to face up to challenges like the SolarWinds hack. I'm determined to ensure that both government and business are clear-eyed about the cyber threats we face, whether from criminals or from state actors. Doing so helps us to disrupt those threats and deter our adversaries. We'll look at recent case studies, including SolarWinds, which the UK government, supported by NCSC and in concert with our allies, attributed to the Russian intelligence service, the SVR. And we will end CyberUK on a discussion of the future threat landscape. So for me personally, it's been an extraordinary time to join this organisation and this amazing team in the middle of a pandemic, but also during a series of events that have illustrated how far we in the UK have come, but also how much we still have to do on cybersecurity. I've been incredibly impressed by everything I've seen so far, and really determined to do my best to keep the UK the safest place to live and work online, with all of your help. So with that, it's now time to begin the first session of CyberUK 2021. This morning, we'll be hearing from our sponsor for today, NCC Group, from their CEO Adam Palser and CTO Ollie Whitehouse. We have CEO of SolarWinds Sudhakar Ramakrishna in conversation with the NCSC's own operations director, Paul Chichester, followed by reflections from us as a team on what we've learnt from that incident. And we'll then have panel discussions on connected places technology and professionalising cybersecurity. But first of all, and with no further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Jeremy Fleming, my boss and director of GCHQ. Jeremy.
Good morning, and thanks to Lindy for that introduction. I'm really happy to be with you today, even if it is virtually. Now, Lindy took over from Kieran last October, and I promise you that a Northern Irish accent is not a prerequisite for her job. She's brought a wealth of international security and government expertise to the role, and is already making a difference. Now, it's great to have her as part of the team. I know how much she's looking forward to meeting you in person too. And so to today. At a time when cybersecurity has never been more essential to the nation's prosperity and resilience, CyberUK is more vital than ever in bringing us together. No one organisation can meet these challenges alone. We all need to play our part, and no one country can do this in isolation. Working with like-minded partners around the world is key. Cyber is most definitely a team sport. As Lindy has just outlined, over the next 2 days, we'll be talking about the changing threat landscape, what that means for resilience, the big issues of the day, and what collectively we can do to stay ahead. Of course, there have been some big changes since we last got together. It will not have escaped your attention that we are still living through a global pandemic. I suspect I will not be the only one to reference this today. And that's unsurprising when you look at the impact it's had on our lives and how much change it's catalysed. When COVID demands we must keep our distance, technology is playing an even greater role in bringing us together. The pandemic has accelerated the pace of change, both in terms of the threats and our response. And cyber is underpinning more and more of our lives. Innovations in technology have made it even more central to our societies, and data has become the crown jewels that we must protect. But it's easy to see that all of this has also enabled our adversaries. The result is that cybersecurity is even more relevant to our economy, to our society, and increasingly to our security. The fact that so many of you are joining us today for this, our first virtual CyberUK, shows that you get this too. Now, the last time I spoke at CyberUK was from a stage in Glasgow. Many of you will remember the sheer scale of the event, the buzz in the auditorium and around the exhibitors' hall, and the amazing things that happen when you bring such a vibrant mix of professionals together. Next year, we'll be in Wales, and the year after, we're heading to Northern Ireland. And by 2023, we will have held CyberUK in all 4 of the home nations. Now that's really important to me, as GCHQ and NCSE are assets for the whole country. But back to today. Although we're not able to physically come together, I'm hoping that we can bring the same energy. Of course, it's essential we recognise that the environment we are operating in is changing. And as I've said previously, without action, it is increasingly apparent that the key technologies on which we rely for prosperity and security won't be shaped and controlled by the West. We can see significant technology leadership is moving east. It's causing a conflict of interests, of values, where prosperity and security are at stake. And it follows that cybersecurity is an increasingly strategic issue that needs a whole-of-nation approach if we are to continue to reap the benefits of technology. Now, these are really big themes, and they have big stakes. There is no doubt that we are facing a moment of reckoning. I'm optimistic about our response. After all, the UK has considerable soft and hard power. We are already a leading cyber power. We have a history of technological innovation, from the early proto-computers to the World Wide Web. British ingenuity continues to shape the world. But it's clear that to face up to this moment of reckoning, we need to protect and build our strategic technology advantage. And by that I mean using science and tech to help defend against threats, to amplify our values, and as a consequence, make Britain stronger and more prosperous. Now, this agenda was detailed in the recent integrated review. It sets out how the UK and allies could use technology to deliver for open societies across the world and those who aspire to join them. I hope you can see your role in making that a reality. For us, the task is to double down on the actions that have made the country a responsible cyber power. And this always starts from a defensive posture. It's nearly 5 years since the NCSE's launch, and in that short time, it's become world-leading and its work is much copied. I'm really proud it's part of GCHQ and of everything it's doing to improve cyber resilience. We know that its work is not yet and may never be done. But we are determined that it will continue evolving to meet the cybersecurity needs of the country. Its recent work in support of our COVID response shows how much value it can add at a national and an international level. And that value comes in many forms. The pandemic has shown yet again that the challenges we face are not just about technology, but they're about how society interacts with that tech. And for me, that means the UK will only be able to thrive in the digital era if we're able to draw people from all backgrounds to work together on these problems. Inclusion has become mission critical, not a nice to have. It's vital to our intelligence and cybersecurity work. And I've seen firsthand how bringing together people who think differently helps us to be more innovative, spot better intelligence, or design better tech. It's not just the morally right thing to do, it's smart business. And many of you see that too. Diversifying the talent pipeline is to the whole profession's benefit. So these themes, the importance of technology to our nation's strategic future, the critical role of cybersecurity and cyber power in making that a reality, the importance of inclusion in making this a success, are what we hope to explore over the next few days. They'll be picked up by all of our keynote speakers too. As Lindy noted, later today we're honoured to be joined by the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, and she'll be talking about how we ensure our legislation and powers continue to meet the challenges posed by the threats we face in cyberspace. And tomorrow, the First Secretary of State, Dominic Raab, will share his thoughts on what it means to be a responsible cyber power and the importance of international rules that serve the common good. And to stress the international nature of these issues, we're delighted to be joined by a range of speakers from around the world, and they can tell us what we look like as a cyber friend and ally. So to sum up, I think this is a critical moment for us to be gathering. As a country, we are weathering the storm of COVID-19. Calmer waters are on the horizon. We can see trade is beginning to bounce back. We know that tech, digital and cyber are central to our future. And that means that all of you, as critical members of the UK's world-leading cyber team, have a fundamental role to play in unblocking the opportunities that lie ahead. I'm delighted CYBERUK is able to offer such a strong lineup to develop these thoughts. I hope the next few days will help inspire new ideas, energise you, and reaffirm your part in this team. I'm really looking forward to what's to come, and of course, to seeing you in person very soon. Thank you.
Well, good morning. My name is Adam Palser. I'm the Chief Executive of NCC Group, and I'm joined today by Ollie Whitehouse, who is our Chief Technology Officer, and he's graciously agreed to wear a suit, especially for the occasion. Now, just a few words on NCC Group. We are lucky enough to work with 2,000 colleagues spread all over the world. We work with customers in every part of the globe. Although we are resolutely global in our outlook, we are proud to be headquartered here in the UK, and we are especially proud of the work that we're able to do in support of the NCSC, in support of their mission. But this is not an advert for NCC Group. What this is the lived experience for us of the last 12 months. Takes us to today, where our message is very simple. Embracing inclusion and diversity is essential for the success, possibly even the survival, of any organisation in the post-COVID world. It's a bold claim, but here we go. Now let's start with the post-COVID world, shall we? What we're not going to talk about this morning are things that you already know. That COVID was massively disruptive, that anybody who couldn't operate digitally ran the risk of failure or going into stasis. The need to operate digitally drove a transformation, an acceleration of the digital transformation by 5 years in the space of 6 months. And of course, all of that kit plugged together in a hurry, often by people who were trying to homeschool their kids, worried about their health or whatever it was, means that we have this huge hackers playground. So we're not going to talk about that, but I suspect we'll be hearing a lot of it over the course of this conference, and importantly so. What we're talking about is the fact that diversity and inclusion is essential for the success of any organisation. But look, we're going to be brave, right? We're going to assume that everybody watching this already buys in to the fundamentals of diversity and inclusion, that everybody has a right to fair and equal treatment. Everybody has the same opportunities to progress. And I recognise that sadly is a battle which continues and is not universally accepted. But we're going to talk today about three aspects of diversity, which are particularly relevant for the cybersecurity industry. Number one, diversity of thought. Number two, skills. And three, diversity of technology. So to lead us into that, diversity of thought. Ollie.
Thanks, Adam. So I think what we recognise is that how we've approached cybersecurity over the last 20 years is not going to be sufficient for the next 20. We need different and new approaches in order to meet the challenges ahead. And in order to do that, we need far and wide-ranging thought exercises from a diverse set of individuals in order to enable us to do that. The answers and the solutions we do not know yet, but we need to have the cultures inside organisations which encourage people from outside in, which allow a very healthy but friendly means of challenging to allow us to identify what the correct ways are that enable us to build these new and resilient infrastructure. One of the challenges that we have today is that we have very few first principles, and we know that. So an evidence and a science-led based approach here is going to be one of the defining moments of our industry. However, the individuals that come from a particular socio-economic or particular style of education, that cannot be the only way. There will be creativity, and there will be those that have the new and unexpected answers to our problems. But we have to have environments which are, as Adam says to me, like boardrooms and not courtrooms, which allow the existing ways and the ways that we've always done things to be challenged and unpicked, and allow us to find those new golden threads on how we are going to build technology, build organisations and move at pace. But the thing that we have to take into account here is we have never known as much as we have around cyber risk, and that is what is going to be one of the foundational pillars. But one of the other foundational pillars is based in our skills base.
Indeed. So diversity of thought, essential, and that comes from having a diversity of colleagues working with us. Now, we know that there is a war for talent in the cybersecurity world. There aren't enough people with the right skills. We know that. And so it's so essential that we are able to bring new people in, train them up and so on. And let's think again of our experience over the last 12 months. We were barely weeks into the disruption caused by the pandemic when something remarkable began to happen. There we were, battling down the hatches, wondering what was going to happen, and people started to leave. Not many, but a few. We lost some talented people, and they went to work for fantastic companies, often based on the west coast of the US, Bay Area titans and all the rest of it. But here's the interesting thing. They didn't live on the west coast. In some cases, they didn't even live in North America. So incredible. COVID broke the seal on something incredibly important and incredibly simple. You don't need to live and work in the same place. And very, very quickly, we realized that the competitive landscape had changed. Not winning work against other companies, but the landscape to attract and retain talented people. Suddenly, we were up against a global field of competition. But of course, with threat comes opportunity. And we recognized that if we were agile, and if we really embraced inclusion and made NCC Group a place where everybody felt welcome, then we could insource talent from all sorts of places, right? Geographically, yes, obviously, but also tapping into typically underserved pools of talent, whether it's people returning to work after a career break, whether it's people looking for a second career and retraining. And so, one incredibly exciting opportunity that we've been working on over the last 12 months. But getting hold of, insourcing talent from all of these different areas is essential if, on the front line, we are going to continue to make a difference and in our own little way, make the world safer and more secure. Which takes us, Ollie, to the front line and diversity of technology.
Yes, thank you, Adam. So what we've recognised is having a dependence on very few suppliers in any part of our technology landscape is actually a significant risk. What we saw with the NCSC and the reporting on the Russian SVR was their effectiveness at exploiting common software was immense. But however, the impact of that was actually minimised because we had diversity in our technology base and our supply base. And that's going to be one of the imperatives going forward. And that's for two reasons. One is technology diversity creates an economic edge and an opportunity for the United Kingdom. We know an awful lot on how to build great technology and export it. By driving the need for diversity and showing that edge allows customers to benefit from it without having to go through arguably very sloth-like suppliers to get into those supply chains. The second is it ultimately builds resilience. By having good competition there, allows the free market to do what it does best and allows independent competition based on the performance of the product of itself. Being beholden to one or two companies in any area of technology is fundamentally risky. However, as technologists, we all have a duty. We have to hold chief executives to account and other business people to make sure that we design and we build these technologies in a resilient fashion. We know how to do this again. We have an inkling. We've seen it work. However, too often we know that the reality is that capitalism kicks in and they are built for the lowest price point. We have a duty to make sure that we build security in from the start and that is done in a way which can be measured and maintained more importantly. If we do that, then we create a massive, massive economic advantage for the UK in the products and the services, more importantly, that it will allow to be consumed from overseas.
And so there we go. It is my absolute privilege to lead a diverse global organisation, and it's one which is listed on the London Stock Exchange. I often think that my daily challenge is to look after my three sets of stakeholders, our colleagues, our customers and our shareholders and keep them equally happy, or, as I like to joke, equally unhappy. What has become absolutely apparent to me over the last 12 months and more is that without embracing fully diversity and inclusion, we will not succeed. And so that is what we're busy doing. Our colleagues, we've already talked about. In order to insource talent and have the skills that we are going to need to meet the growing demand over the coming years, we have to get better at adapting ourselves and making ourselves a warm, inclusive, and ultimately, therefore, diverse environment with the skills that we need. Secondly, shareholders. You know, we are, as I said, listed on the London Stock Exchange. So twice a year, I pack my bag and I go and talk to the top 30 or so shareholders. Very interesting. Last September, when I went to talk to them, one asked about ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues, of which, of course, diversity and inclusion is such an important part. One. And then in February, when we went out, 16. I wonder what it's going to be next time. I suspect a lot more. So investors are looking for it, our colleagues need it, and our customers increasingly are asking for it. As I say, we're proud to be headquartered in the UK. The UK has a proud tradition of being a trading nation. Global Britain, if we are agile and if we are able to embrace difference and draw in talent from around the world, really can be a world-beating success. Thank you very much.
Hi everybody, my name is Paul Chichester. I'm the Director of Operations here at the National Cybersecurity Centre, and it's a great pleasure to be introducing today's keynote speaker. When we were thinking about the sort of kind of topics that we might choose, there's been a whole raft of sort of important high-profile events through the year. But one stood out certainly to me and some of the teams here, and that was the compromise at SolarWinds and the subsequent sort of knock-on effect and impact across the globe that was felt, but also here in the UK. I can't think of a better person to talk to us about that topic than the Chief Exec of SolarWinds, Sudhakar Ramakrishna. And so I'm hugely grateful to him for giving us some time. And I caught up with Sudhakar last week just to get his own personal reflections on the time that he's been with the company, how the company have responded, and a little bit more reflection on what this means for both the public and the private sector as we go into this year and beyond. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Paul Chichester and I'm the Director of Operations at the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Sudhakar Ramakrishna, CEO of SolarWinds, to give our keynote today. Now, Sudhakar joined SolarWinds as President and Chief Executive Officer in January 2021, so not long ago, at an obviously pivotal moment for the company. He's a global technology leader with 25 years of experience across cloud, mobility, networking, security, and collaboration markets, holding senior positions previously in a range of high-profile technology companies. Now, unless you've been in a cave for the last 6 months, you'll know that SolarWinds was one of the companies at the center of a global cyber operation undertaken by the Russian intelligence services that sought to exploit global software supply chains to conduct espionage, potentially amongst other things. So it's great to have Sudhakar here with us today to give us some, I'm sure, unique insights into what it's been like being parachuted into the eye of the storm and what perhaps both public and private sectors can do to work together going forward. Sudhakar, thank you for joining us today. Over to you.
Paul, thanks a lot for having me here. It is my absolute pleasure to be with you. Before I introduce myself and the concept of secure by design, I want to take a second to thank you profusely for the partnership that you have displayed in my tenure here, as well as to the broader industry at large. It is the efforts of people like you that make it easier for us to create public-private partnerships and to ensure that together we create a safer environment for all of us. As you mentioned, it is not too long ago that I joined the company. It's about 100 days now. And it is a very atypical onboarding process for me because unlike what you do in a normal job, I was parachuted, as you put it, right into the middle of a fairly significant nation state attack that we experienced as SolarWinds. And subsequent to us, I'm sure you've seen other vendors come out and talk about their own attacks. So this is a very concerning thing, or this should be a very concerning thing for all of us. And at SolarWinds, we committed ourselves to collaboration and transparency as two principles right from the get-go. I'll provide a brief update on what happened, but more importantly, focus on the future with regards to what we are working on and working towards. To put it simply, the threat actor, through tremendous sophistication, persistence, and patience, installed a piece of malware into our build systems. The piece of malware was looking for when our automated build processes kick off. And when that happens, in a matter of a few nanoseconds to microseconds, detected one particular file amongst thousands of files in our system and replaced it with another file, which for the most part was identical to the original file, except that it also had the malware, which ended up being the backdoor installed in many customer deployments. Although the number of affected customers is very small, that we eventually discovered, it is still a very important thing to discover because this is a unique and very novel attack on the supply chain of a company. To be clear, none of our source code control systems were tampered with. So to the degree that, let's say, somebody did, then we would have logs, we would have the ability to go back in history. In this particular case, they were very clear and very sophisticated about covering their tracks. That made the detection that much more difficult, and that made the sophistication that much more relevant to the industry, because what happened to us could happen to any vendor out there or many customers out there. Because one thing that I've noticed as I've spoken to hundreds of customers over the last several days is that they're also builders of software. They also have supply chains, and they're also careful about protecting them. The most significant thing here is not to behave like a victim, so to speak, and accept that this can happen to anybody. There's always learnings in any crisis, and we were no exception in this particular one as well. So that's how we created the construct of Secure by Design, which has three broad aspects to it. The first one is infrastructure security, and what do we do to enhance infrastructure security? This has to do with least privileged access. This has to do with better threat hunting software. And this has to do with giving our Chief Information Security Officer more autonomy in terms of how they build red teams, how they essentially attack our own systems so that we become smarter and more aware earlier rather than later. So that is one key aspect of it, which is infrastructure. Two is on the build systems, we are implementing parallel build systems as opposed to a singular build system, which is the norm in the industry. The idea here is that we will build our software in three different environments with potentially three different access privileges and reconcile and check the integrity across various build systems. Therefore, we hope to achieve a level of non-repudiation as opposed to simple integrity that is provided by the code signing certificate technology that the entire industry adopts. This is a unique process that we have established that we hope to proliferate in the software industry as we learn from it and apply our learnings and communicate our learnings more broadly. And then last but not least, continually evolving our software development life cycles to secure development life cycles, where we are essentially left shifting security and not trying to baseline it after the fact with things like pen testing. Elements like pen testing will always be important, but it is important to ensure that every designer, every developer is embedding security into everything that we do. Similar to building in quality, building in security. That's a mindset shift as much as a tools shift. And then last but not least, in the spirit of collaboration and transparency, we have committed to not only sharing our findings with the broader industry, but also creating stronger public-private partnerships.
Thank you. And you sort of touched on the sort of secure by design ethos and the sort of work you're doing. Obviously, you know, that doing a lot of that work increases, you know, costs and things like that. From an incentives point of view, do you think we've got the right incentives to encourage a wider take-up of that approach and that strategy?
Unfortunately, I think, Paul, that is still a work in progress and much work remains to be done. I'm a big believer in, call it the carrot philosophy as opposed to simply the stick philosophy. And in this regard, there is a lot of hesitancy and hesitation. One of the common questions I receive is, why are you so transparent about this as SolarWinds? What caused you to do that? And therein lies, call it the challenge that I think many vendors, many developers face, because when they have issues, there is almost a disincentive to project them. And the hope is that nobody else will actually find it. So there is a notion of victim shaming implicitly or explicitly that happens that we should try to root out. And this is where I think the public-private partnerships are very, very important, because ultimately, if we all care about the collective safety of all of us, then we must practice what I've been dubbing a collective vigil system, where there is an opportunity and an incentive to come out quickly, to reduce threat surfaces, to decrease threat windows across all environments.
Thanks. And so I think, you know, as the NCSC, we deal with, you know, hundreds of incidents each year, 2,000 since we've stood up in 2016. And one of the challenges we have is exactly that conversation with chief execs or CISOs or boards around going public or being sort of open about the incident. You know, it's certainly a debate that we have in the UK about whether more regulation or legislation is the approach, or actually it's about building trust. There's probably no right or wrong, but, you know, how do you feel about some of those other levers, I suppose, that the public sector could bring to this?
The public sector has a huge role to play in this. As I complimented you earlier, you've already reached out to us in the spirit of partnership, as opposed to simply in the spirit of investigating or discovering. So that attitude of partnership, collaboration, transparency, I would say goes a long way to building trust and opening us up, so to speak, to our vulnerabilities, no pun intended in that context. So doing that will, in my opinion, encourage more of us to discuss and share. And the second aspect of it is, ultimately, as a vendor, for instance, here as a software developer, I'm focused on the safety of our customers. To that end, we should be always transparent about what could affect them, what may affect them, and how are we doing our very best to protect them, which is the intent and the attitude that we have taken. So in that regard, our customers may be using, and most likely are using, software from different vendors. So the more proactively we can share any threat information, those other vendors can also learn, and collectively we can protect the environments of our customers. That is one of my primary motivations. As competitive as we are, as best in class as we want to be, we also have a certain obligation and responsibility to ensure that the information and the knowledge that we gain is shared, so that together we keep our customer environment safe. And so there are many different motivations and incentives that could be a whole topic by itself. At the same time, I think the public sector can do a few things. One is create symmetric relationships with us, meaning information sharing that's two-way. Provide guidelines and guidance that are unambiguous, and where necessary, apply regulation as well. in terms of better practices of information sharing and security breach sharing.
Thank you. So I'm sure there are a lot of CEOs, CISOs listening to our conversation here. And I suppose, if there were one or two things you could say to them that perhaps might convince them to be more open and transparent, how would you encourage them to do that? What are the benefits that you see in that?
The way I would characterize this, Paul, is I'll go back to this notion of collaboration and transparency. That is, call it more of a behavioral aspect. The outcome-based approach here is the true safety and security of our customers. And the reason for this notion of community vigil and the reason for sharing things frequently and consistently is that we can incorporate those learnings proactively as opposed to each one of us discovering the same problems over and over again. Now, if you extend it further into situations like nation states, if a nation state is determined to attack a single vendor, I'm sure given time, they will find a way of breaching into a single vendor. So now how do you protect against that? We all like to think that we won't be the next one, but then there's no guarantees around that. And so there is all the more reason to build this notion of community vigil, ensure that we are sharing information. There is a commercial benefit to doing it as well, because the cost of dealing with this one by one is humongous. And to the degree that we want to translate value to customers, and value could be in the context of safety, value could be in the context of superior products at a superior price, driving some of these behaviors of collaboration and transparency will be to the commercial benefit as well, as in addition to just doing the right thing.
Thanks. So just building on actually the point you talk about, the sort of nation state threat, and obviously sort of the UK and US have made our sort of view on the attribution recently. Certainly, I think in the UK and I'm sure in the US there is a conversation ongoing about can the private sector, can commercial organisations really be expected to defend against, as you say, a very persistent, a very well-resourced adversary when they're a nation state. Just interested in your thoughts around just how much you feel that, again, the public sector and governments need to lean in to help the private sector on occasions where clearly, the threat is so significant.
I would look at it as a mutual responsibility and mutual accountability model. The fact that you may be a smaller company or a mid-sized company or maybe strapped for resources is not an excuse to continue to learn and continue to serve and continue to protect, is the way I would characterize it. Because even the largest of large companies have been breached, as we know. So size by itself is not an indicator of your ability to completely protect yourself. And this is, again, where I kind of go back to this construct of there is a learning opportunity for everyone in every such incident, and being active and conscious is what is most important here. But at the same time, there are different ways of making it scalable. So for instance, I'm speaking actively with some industry leaders to potentially form a consortium of, call it mid-sized companies, which if you add up all the mid-sized companies, it could be like one very large entity that could take on even potentially a nation state in that context, where there is a lot of free sharing of information, including security information, to build a more protective moat, so to speak. So that could be like one construct that I feel we can initiate and we can drive. Similarly, if all of us commit to sharing that information with the public sector, and the public sector in turn, let's call it distills it, provides specific recommendations and continues to improve those recommendations and finds a way of not only building accountability in us, but providing regulation to help enforce it, then we can all get to a level of standardization that hitherto has been very ad hoc. So those are some, call it policy and behavioral based things that we can do, and not accept that just because a nation state attacks a mid-sized company or large company for that matter, that you don't stand a chance.
And so again, I mean, I think there's some really good models to follow there as well. I know sort of Defence Industrial Base has for a long time sort of collaborated in that way. The financial services sector does. One of the things that we have been looking at in the UK is not just sharing knowledge, but providing services. So we run a DNS service for the public sector. And you get sort of the benefits of scale there. I know in the defence sector, they're looking maybe at running services for smaller companies, smaller supply chain companies. Do you think that's something, again, that might be, beyond just an information sharing, but actually larger organisations creating services that perhaps the smaller ones couldn't normally afford, but could gain access to?
Absolutely. I think that would be a very progressive thing to do as well. And there's always a debate between what services should be provided by the public sector versus the private sector. And ultimately, all these boil down to a spectrum of collaboration and transparency, which may from time to time swing from one extreme to another. But hopefully we'll continue to focus on what is the right equilibrium, so to speak, between these two things, where you have speed and efficiency on one hand, but safety and security equally focused as well.
Thanks. So, I mean, we've obviously talked a lot about the work you've done, I know, with US government colleagues and with us. Cybersecurity, your business is a global one. I know we're sort of looking at what more we can do with wider international partners, both in Europe but around the globe. One of the challenges, and I think a very fair one, that we get very often from people like yourself is, we need to create a better approach that is a more joined up global public sector one. Based on your experiences sort of in the last few months and maybe before as well, what would you say to us as a community, as a global set of governments? Are there more things that we can do, either in setting common standards or common guidance?
First of all, Paul, I would say I'm very encouraged by the response of the government, both in terms of learning and understanding, but critically acting on what needs to get done. And there's a number of initiatives in the US as well, as well as in the UK and other places. The notion of the 5 Eyes itself is, I think, a very important construct that we have in terms of providing the ability to information share across countries and continents. Obviously, in this particular case, the 5 countries. But that construct can potentially be proliferated into other countries and other agencies to help a level of information sharing that might allow us to be a lot more proactive and a lot more knowledgeable. In the US, obviously, we've seen the work that Ann Neuberger and her team are doing, which is very progressive, in my opinion. 2 is the Solarium Commission, which has got a combination of people from the Senate and the Congress to contribute to a report, which I would say is very comprehensive in terms of best practices, guidelines, specifics, and some of which have already been implemented. And I know you have similar initiatives as well. So I'm seeing a lot more consistency of behavior and approach across the public sector. And it warms my heart that there is a greater propensity to understand and accept that this is not a one company situation, and instead it should be taken a lot more seriously. And what has even caused, I would say, acceleration in that behavior and belief system, even in the last 60 days, is independent of us. Some very large companies have come out and spoken about their own attacks, or them being attacked, I should say, by other nation states. So another reason why, whether you're big or small, we need to take heed to what's happening and then continue to collaborate around these dimensions.
Thank you. You touched on some of your secure by design ideas and some of the things you're doing in the company, and the sort of things obviously we find effective. But things like red teaming, hunting, things like that are still actually not very prevalent, or certainly not enough in the community. I wouldn't be interested to get your thoughts on why the benefits you see of that. You've talked about sort of implementing those, but what you think you'll gain from that. And again, sort of thinking about talking to the other CEOs and other people maybe listening today. I'll sort of give a few thoughts from our perspective maybe afterwards, but interested in sort of why you think they're important.
I have been a practitioner in this industry, and to some degree, the reason we have been able to move quickly on some of these initiatives, including Secure by Design, is Secure by Design is a construct that I have implemented in other companies as well, except that not to the same focus and degree, I would say, that we are attempting to do at SolarWinds. So whereas previously my focus was in the context of a steady state operation, how do you think about the security posture? How do you think about secure by design and so on? Here it was in the context of we are in the middle of an active breach. And so what do we do? So it allowed me to be a lot more comprehensive rather than, let's say, be focused on the software development lifecycle, as the case may have been in previous companies. So I do have some context, having both experimented and learned from experimentation, which makes me have greater conviction that some of these things should not be compromised. Two is coming specifically to the red teaming aspect. I recognize that that could be a resource drain in some companies as well. And that is where I think we need to balance the near-term priorities with the longer-term goals of safety and security for all. And it does not have to be an all or nothing type approach. And there's a lot of incremental steps in the maturation that one can take by investing and leveraging a lot of open source tools, automated tools. So it does not have to be human resource intensive at all points in time. But the most important reason for doing something like that, in my opinion, is a creation of an independent entity within the organization that will allow us to basically behave like a threat actor, act like a threat force, and see how we can be vigilant at all points in time and not have to react when something goes wrong. So there are many more reasons for doing something like that. And where I'm going with this is, instead of just doing audits, like paper audits, get into the world of actually practicing, thinking like threat actors, behaving like them, and seeing if you can fortify yourself better from the outside.
Yeah, and definitely agree with, I think, all of that. We're certainly keen to look at adversary simulation, great fan of the attack framework from MITRE, and sort of using that sort of model different adversaries and sort of really sort of build that in. And I think perhaps the holy grail of sort of linking it to return on investment, actually being able to see why certain countermeasures and why certain activities are worthwhile. In terms of sort of return on investment from security, that's certainly something that I think a lot of our companies still really struggle with. Sort of your sort of thoughts on, is there a way of quantifying this in perhaps a better way, using standards like attack or things like that?
Yes, to your point about the MITRE attack vectors, there are companies now that are automating that entire system itself. And those are tools that can be used at a reasonably low expense to get a tremendous level of benefit. So I'm looking at these things not so much as the volume of expense, as much as the level of impact that can be created for a unit of expense. So I'll always try to be cost conscious, but have a investment bias is the way to think about it. So it's not expense for expense sake. Now, coming to the notion of ROI, there are different ways to think about this, Paul. So a lot of times when you think about quality, let's move away from security for a second. There are dedicated teams that are built for quality in many companies. And the question always is, what is the return I'm getting on that? That is a function of what is my cost of quality in the beginning and what's the cost of my poor quality. I would say for a company that has, let's call it $100 million being spent on research and development, my experience says that at least 20% is attributable to cost of poor quality. So, but it is not in plain sight, so you really don't see it. So what happens is bugs get created, bugs get released, bugs get reported, bugs get fixed, and then re-released. So that entire cycle, I would say, is cost of poor quality. So instead of suffering through those in many cycles and many variations, are you not better off in having some of those principles be ingrained and embedded, yes, for a certain cost, but then that'll save you several folds of dollars or pounds, as the case may be, over time. So it's a classical example of a stitch in time saves nine, as they say, and that applies to quality, that applies to security, and so it requires a little bit more deliberation and patience, I would say. It's not fashionable, I accept, but I think it's required.
Thank you. Sort of fascinating stuff there. I think, just looking ahead, sort of change of tack for a moment, you seem like a really kind of optimistic kind of person. Are you optimistic about the future of cybersecurity and sort of how we're really tackling this threat? I know, sort of doing my day job, you have good days and bad days, just about sort of that optimism or pessimism. How do you sort of see maybe the next 3 to 5 years going in our business?
You can describe me as a stubborn optimist, Paul. So I will remain optimistic about this. And I truly am, because I truly believe that we as practitioners will rise up to any challenge that is thrown at us. And I also believe that we are a bunch of people that are constantly learning. I consider myself to be, and my company for that matter, to be constantly learning about everything and anything and trying to incorporate that into our future. So as long as we can continue doing that, and as long as we maintain the spirit of transparency and collaboration, I see no reason but to be optimistic. And if I think about the next 3 to 5 years, the way I would say it is that the threat landscape is only going to get worse. The attackers are only going to get more sophisticated. The attackers are going to get only more resourceful and only more persistent. So in that world, you may say, then why are you so optimistic? I'm optimistic because I believe that we will do the very best to learn much faster than them. I believe that we will collaborate much more than trying to be lone wolves, so to speak. And I think there'll be a much stronger public-private partnership that will come out of the learnings from the incidents of the last several years.
Thank you. So just sort of picking up on some of those points and the sort of threat growing, do you sort of have a sense or sort of make a prediction around sort of what that threat landscape looks like? I think one of the things from the UK's perspective is perhaps the proliferation of threat actors. Certainly, yes, we're used to dealing with sort of the usual nation states, but certainly sort of seeing the opportunity and the access to capability being much broader. Is that something that, again, you think we need to be focused on?
Absolutely, Paul. Just like information asymmetry and knowledge asymmetry no longer exist in the world, and that allows us to have innovation, invention, startups anywhere in the world, the same construct really applies on the threat actor side as well, right? Because the breaking down of information asymmetry, knowledge asymmetry has enabled them or emboldened them to take on more as well. So that is the constant, call it, race that we are in. That's one reason why I believe the frequency and the sophistication will only increase, or should be expected to increase and not be minimized.
Well, Sudhakar, thank you so much for talking to us today, giving us some really sort of, I think, thought-provoking insights and your experiences from the front line over the last few months of what I think everybody has experienced as a real challenge. As always, I sort of give you sort of the last word and just your sort of sense of perhaps what are the sort of, you know, one or two key things that you've learned that you didn't know 6 or 9 months ago that you'll carry forward with you in the months and the years to come.
Paul, the first thing I want to highlight here is the spirit of the employees at SolarWinds to support our customers and working with our partners has been tremendous. Without their attitude, I don't think I'd be half as effective as I have been in addressing our customers' needs, our partners' needs, as well as the broader partner ecosystem, such as yourself. So my gratitude and thanks go to them. And if you ask me, looking back, what did I learn? Well, I've always believed in it. I've witnessed firsthand that with the right team and the right attitude and the right commitment, we can overcome a lot and learn from it, apply those learnings in action, and still take the high road and still take the attitude of we learned something, we have to share it and be transparent and collaborative. So my hope and aspiration is that we will continue on this journey, because I truly believe it's a journey. By no means are we done. My hope also is that I can enlist more partners, both in the private sector as well as in the public sector, to make all of us more safer, more secure, and critically, to your earlier point, productive. For those of us that are following or pursuing commercial interests, successful as well.
Thank you. Well, again, you know, thanks for some great insights today. Thanks for your transparency, and we look forward to collaborating on an optimistic future going forward. So, thank you again very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hi, well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation that we had with Sudhakar last week. Quite a few points to perhaps reflect on a bit more. So now we're going to have a panel just looking at some of those points, and I'm going to hand over to Lindy now to lead us off on that.
Thanks, Chich. And of course, we've got Ian Levy with us as well, Technical Director. So Chich, what was your reflection on that conversation? I mean, you know, we use SolarWinds as shorthand for, as you said, a much wider set of activity. But I mean, what did you think?
So I think, I mean, there's a few things. One, I thought there was quite a broad range of points that came out of that, more sort of longer term learning. I think one particular point, and Sudhakar and I touched on it early on, was just sort of using that name, using the company's brand almost to define an incident, when in fact actually we know that that was part, and it continues just to be part of a much wider campaign by the adversary. That really sort of focuses on a wide set of public and private organisations that we categorise in sort of 3 ways. So the first is obviously targets that we know, I'll use APT29 as a shorthand, that adversary is interested in, primarily for espionage purposes. Perhaps what's different is the way that they go after the supply chain for those organisations that they're trying to target. And perhaps even more sort of unusual is targeting the organisations that are trying to understand them as an adversary. So effectively sort of looking at their own sort of force protection. So I think, you know, some really sort of different characteristics. And so SolarWinds was just one of a number of organisations that are affected by the whole campaign. I suppose what was perhaps different compared to some of the things, you know, certainly the basic techniques and tactics that we see them employ are similar to lots of advanced adversaries. Perhaps the unusual element was how they stitched it together. I think, you know, probably what makes, adversaries stand out beyond others these days is not necessarily the atomic actions they do, but how they bring them together in a campaign and how they pull that together, and that was certainly the case here. And I think also with my sort of, you know, professional hat on, thinking about the operational security that we saw and how hard it was to investigate and uncover that.
Yeah. I mean, what was really new about this, though? I mean, was it new?
Well, so I think, again, the individual tactics and techniques weren't. I mean, if you think about supply chain, certainly the element that we saw in terms of targeting a company was similar to something like NotPetya, for instance. But again, how they brought that together, I think, is probably what is new and necessarily new, but certainly put this above perhaps the normal run-of-the-mill investigations and incidents we deal with.
And is NotPetya then the best comparison in terms of what we've seen before?
It's one of. I mean, again, I think, sort of, they both happen to be Russian, but, other threat actors are available. And I think we've certainly seen sort of, other nation states looking at supply chain as a vector to achieve their aims. Yeah. So again, whilst that became part of the story, I think, those perhaps who sort of have the pleasure of living and breathing this would probably say that wasn't that unusual.
Yeah. So then a question to both of you, what did we learn from this? I mean, perhaps Chich, to you on the sort of incident management, on the kind of, value we got out of ACD, for example, and I mean, sort of perhaps a broader question to you about what you think we learnt as an organisation. But
yeah, so I think, personally, sort of three key lessons, I suppose, that I would pick out. The first is preparation. One of the sort of most important things, both as a nation when we're preparing to deal with cyber incidents, but I think this is true for enterprises as well, is being prepared and having the processes that you can really just instinctively turn to. And that was certainly the case with this incident. We stood up our normal incident management processes, both at an NCSC level, but at a national level. That worked, I think, well. We really understood from a UK, both public and private sector point of view, certainly critical infrastructure, where the exposure was. SolarWinds themselves and were really helpful in sort of helping us understand the threat. Again, that makes all the difference in terms of having that transparency, so you can really start to, deal with some of the, bound the problem space. So preparation, I think, is really important. I think partnerships, I mean, sort of building on that, obviously working closely with SolarWinds, but actually all the other companies, both sort of victim organisations, for want of a better phrase, that again were hugely transparent, and there were a large number of companies and organisations we worked with and do day to day on other incidents. And I think the really important element there is having those relationships up front very often, or being able to build trust really quickly. And so partnerships for me was important, and also helping us piece together the adversary tactics. I mean, I sort of touched on the complexity and the operational security. Even an organisation like ourselves or other governments are never, I think, going forward, ever going to be able to understand an adversary on our own. Mm-hmm. We cannot do that anymore. We absolutely need an industry and its largest sense to help us understand that. And you touched on the start about it's a team sport. It absolutely is on that partnerships. And I think the third point, and maybe sort of leads to sort of Ian's view, is something about prevention's better than cure. There's a lot that I think, even though we talked about the sophistication of this adversary and the operation, there were still many things that actually I think would have helped prevent some of these compromises. So yeah, that would be the three I would talk about.
Thank you. So great. So Ian, good hook for you then. So prevention's better than cure. Discuss. What did we learn from this?
So I think we learned, first things first, like most things in cybersecurity, details really matter. And so Chich and Sudhaka's point about the SolarWinds attack, it hides a whole multitude of different things, and they each need different treatment. And so I think getting into the detail really matters. From a prevention point of view, like Chich said, this is an incredibly sophisticated actor, but they still have to obey the laws of physics and the laws of mathematics, right? They're not omniscient and omnipotent. They still have to do stuff. And we can take some of those things away from them. So if you think about the particular product, the Orion product, it's a network management product. So it's it's got the keys to your network kingdom. Something like that, you're going to have to really be robustly protecting it. One of the ways you robustly protecting is not connect the damn thing to the internet, right? One of the things that was necessary was when you installed the product, you had to let your network management system talk to the internet. That's one of the ways that the attacker managed to talk to their vulnerability. On our website, we've published guidance for years saying, don't connect your management plane to the internet, because there's no way to defend it. The way that we are talking about cybersecurity at the moment kind of abstracts people away from it. Yep. And so you talk about trusted products. I trust this product, therefore it can do me no harm. Software is incredibly complicated stuff, and I don't think anybody who's ever written software would ever say that they can build flawless software. It's kind of a research goal that we're still thinking about. And on that basis, that all software is going to have problems, it comes back to what Chich said, preparation. How do you prepare for managing a vulnerability? And that goes down to really, really boring things like patching. The thing that I took away from this, that over everything else, forget all the technical stuff, the thing that I took away from this is that people will twist a situation to their own purposes. And my favourite story that comes out of this is people who are running Orion, running the SolarWinds software as their network management platform, directly connected to the internet, who were happy because they weren't affected by this attack. Not because they were really smart, but because they hadn't patched for 2 years. Right? And so that tells me that we're not doing the hygiene properly. If we do the hygiene properly, we can make all of this much harder, even for the really sophisticated actors. When we're talking about really critical network capabilities like network management, we have to think better. Building networks that are tolerant to exploitation and vulnerability is the new normal because software has bugs. And whether those bugs are accidental because people are people, or they're malicious because someone like AP29's done this, doesn't really matter when you're trying to defend a network.
So are you confident people have taken the right lessons away? I mean, I heard the same story as you did of people being smug about this, the failure to patch. But I mean, have we managed to get people through that?
Nope. I mean, we've been trying for 20 years, right? Yeah. Patching is now so much easier and so much less risky than it was when we first started doing this stuff.
Yeah.
If there's one thing that anybody out there wants to take away, turn on automatic updates, please. Even if you're an enterprise, turn on automatic updates. The sorts of things we've seen over the last 6-9 months in like the big vulnerabilities and the big incidents we've seen, a lot of them come down to people not patching properly. And I know it's really boring, but it is really important.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that with the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability as well, right, where Microsoft had to push really hard to get people to patch.
Yeah, absolutely. And we used the ACD platform for both the Exchange and for SolarWinds. What we saw in the UK, it just happened to be that we could use the ACD platform to look across the UK for the particular Exchange thing, was people taking weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks to patch, even though there was all the noise in the news, even though we were individually contacting them and saying, hey, you've got a vulnerable Exchange server, please patch. And then a couple of days later contacting them saying, hey, you've got a vulnerable Exchange server and there's a bunch of web shells on it now, could you patch them for clean up? The response rate was really variable. And so I think we need to, again, it goes back to really boring stuff like asset management. Yeah. How many of those organizations knew they had a vulnerable Exchange server?
But I mean, what are the excuses when you ring people up for the second time and say that,
It's hard.
Oh, yeah, okay, we know that.
That's it, right? It's hard. And as Sudhakar was kind of alluding to, there's no direct benefit for investing in this stuff.
Yeah.
We as consumers don't buy stuff because a company has secured their CI/CD pipeline better than their competitor.
Yeah.
Right? We don't buy things because they've compiled with ASLR, DEP and other things. We don't value the kind of innate security. It's not seen as a value add at the moment, and we need to change that.
But my sense is, though, that, I mean, we've had the benefit of having the sort of SolarWinds as a shorthand for a much wider set of activity is there is a bit more of a conversation in the boardroom. There's been an awful lot of coverage of this incident. My hope is that CEOs are asking questions of their CISO and actually demanding to know that there is a system in place to make sure that they can patch on a regular basis. Do you see that conversation beginning to happen, or do we have work to do?
So I think we've got a lot of work to do, because again, this is about risk transfer.
Yeah.
So Chich alluded to NotPetya as one of the earlier supply chain attacks. The first one I can think of was back in 2002. Do you remember SendMail got popped, right? So this is very similar to Exchange, right? The most popular mail transfer agent on the planet was popped by someone. And everybody who used it, which was a lot of people, took a balked update. So we've known since 2002 this is a problem. What I see in many boardrooms is trying to transfer cyber risk out to suppliers.
Yeah.
And you can't do that. You can hold them to account for doing the right things, but you cannot transfer responsibility. And I think we need to have a grown-up conversation with boards around the UK of all types to try and help them better understand where they can and can't outsource that risk. Yeah. And I think it's incumbent on us, our organisation, to give them the tools to do that sensibly.
Yeah, and we try and do that with things like, sort of the board toolkit and exercise in a box. But I mean, my sense is that, people see this as a technical set of issues that they hope they can leave to, the technical part of the organisation. It needs to be a risk management conversation that happens in the boardroom, basically, the same way a finance conversation would.
It absolutely does. And I think, I've said this before, right? I think we allow the cyber technology and the technology companies generally to get away with saying things that kind of it's shiny over here, ignore this. So, somebody comes into your boardroom and goes, you can buy my Cyber 5G AI blockchain. It's going to be awesome. It's going to fix all your problems. Your CEO is not likely to ask, did you compile it with the right compiler flags?
Or have you architected it properly?
Have you architected it properly? How do we give them that information really simply? And we're starting to go down that road in the consumer space with the IoT regulations. How do we extend that? And it's really difficult to do that without over-regulating.
And I think, so one of the positive things, I suppose, from incidents like SolarWinds and others is actually you can start to see a shift. We talk about the companies that did have issues, but actually what we found when we, we used some of the ACD capabilities to identify potential organisations that might have been compromised. But what we found when we went and did a real sort of deep dive on tens and tens of organisations was the vast majority had at some point the right defence in depth. So they didn't get everything right, but they'd done enough to actually stop the final compromise. I think that's different from when it would 5-10 years ago. So I think sort of stepping back, I've certainly seen an improvement. I think over time, I think we do sort of make a lot of publicity around the organisations that are compromised, but there are increasing numbers that show it's possible. And I think that's the sort of message for organisations, is that this can be done. There are organisations, there are companies, there are sectors that do this really effectively. And so, this isn't almost a technical problem anymore. This is an investment problem. It's a skills problem. It's making sure that you use the right capabilities in the right way, and you make the right investment choices. Now, none of that's easy. I absolutely get that. And I think, there's still, more to do there. But there is, certainly the key message for me is that, this is not something that is impossible to, fix. Even the highest end nation state, you can defend against those kind of capabilities. And the technology and the capabilities are out there. I suppose the one thing that I think we do need to do better as a sector, and particularly sort of the supplier side, is allow capabilities to work together more. And elements to work together. I still, and I'm sure people will sort of put in the chat, their own personal reflections as CISOs and others, but I think it's still really hard to work out how you put the individual components together to ultimately deliver a good enough cyber defence platform. And so there's more about how do we drive the right behaviours in the vendors to sort of generate that kind of feeling, and a little bit more collaboration and interoperability would probably, I think, be welcomed by many.
Brilliant. So are there any other key lessons we think we want people to take away from this sort of set of incidents?
So I'll give you my sort of operational sort of ones, and there'll probably be others. I think for me, so understanding your own vulnerabilities, we're investing much more now in adversarial attack simulation, red teaming, monitoring, once the system's running, it's always going to get vulnerabilities over a period of time. Getting to know those vulnerabilities before your adversary does is really important, and then detecting your adversary exploiting them. Again, there aren't. It's not a case of being perfectly secure. It's almost how quickly do you want to know that you've been compromised, and your investment decision will calibrate just how quickly you get to know. Most adversaries will, spend quite a bit of time understanding what they're doing, how they're doing it. You do have quite a window for the high-end adversaries, even ransomware. We've seen ransomware actors take months in some cases. It's not always the case, to actually sort of get to the point where they can have the most impact. So I think, there is a lot you can do operationally.
Yeah. Ian?
So I think, think a bit more Russian, think a bit more Chinese. So if you think about how people select victims, obviously there's some pre-selection, but then, as Chich has just said, they're going to look across your external facing stuff. What can they see? Well, you can see exactly what they can see, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's got a firewall at the edge of their network. It's reconfigured every day for operational reasons. Test it. Sit outside and say, what can I see?
Yeah.
Soon as RDP pops up, run back home and turn it off, because it shouldn't be connected to the internet anymore, right? This is something we still see. The RDP Bluekeep vulnerability that we found was reported 2 and a bit years ago.
Yeah.
We've still got over 1,000 endpoints in the UK running vulnerable RDP. That's not okay, right? It's just not been patched. We know that is one of the favourite ways of various threat groups to get in. External facing unpatched vulnerabilities, you kind of deserve what you get if you're on that space, to be honest, these days. So there's something about sitting outside and looking in and making sure that the external interfaces is what you expect them to be. That's the first thing. Second thing is design systems for compromise. There shouldn't be a single point of failure anywhere. Right, and that's really hard to do. There's a load of work going on, both in industry and with us, to try and help build architectures that do that by default. But as far as you can, don't rely on a single product to be perfect all the time, because it's not going to do it. It will fail you. Third thing is, administrators are not normal people. You can take that however you want. The way I
look forward to the chat about that one. So.
Come on YouTube, you can do it. The way I mean it is, you cannot treat your administrators the same as you treat your normal users.
Yeah, absolutely.
They must be treated differently because they have the keys to the kingdom. So they must have different restrictions around what they can do, how they do stuff. If your admins can browse the web and read email on their admin account, you deserve everything you get. I'm sorry, you're done. And then finally, for now, on our website, we've got loads and loads of guidance about how to build something. One of my favourite bits of guidance is the 6 anti-patterns. So it's like, if you've built your network like this, you're going to love this. I'm sorry, you're too stupid to help. Right? These are the things that nobody should ever do.
Right.
Go download it, check your network. If you do it, very quietly fix them in the background and then say you don't do it.
Brilliant. But I mean, your advice to me also when this happened was, pretty much go and read the guidance that's already there, right? I mean, it's not as if this is something that we didn't know about, we couldn't do something about. We've got loads of guidance up there for people to help with this. But
I think, as Chich said, what's new about this is the operational part and the investment behind it. There's a paper by Microsoft Research years ago, and it said if a particular threat group is going to get you, they're going to get you, and there's not a thing you can do about it, right? I think this is all about putting enough road bumps in the road so that their job is harder, and you're more likely to detect them. It goes back to what Chich was saying about, you're going to get compromised at some point. How quickly do you want to know, and how easily do you want to contain the damage?
But all of what we're recommending, effectively, is something that will make people safer from the whole range of adversaries, not necessarily the ones that will put in this much effort, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, Chich, you talked a bit about ACD and what that's done for us. We've put out the 4th annual report on ACD this week. Tell us a bit more about how we use ACD in this instance.
So there were a few of the ACD capabilities that we used on SolarWinds and other sort of incidents. One is the protective DNS capability, which I think is, you won't mind me saying, is one of the sort of flagship ACDs we've got. It is awesome. I'm biased, but I think, and it serves a number of functions. I mean, it was there really to try and reduce the majority of the harm in an automated way, and it does that day in, day out. It's free to public sector organisations. They can sign up. It's consensual, and it effectively uses the service to resolve their IP and domain names. That has thousands now of consumers and users, and they get that automatic blocking. On instance, where it really comes into its own as well, is it allows us to do that forensic investigation of working out, well, what happened. And so one of the benefits of that is we do actually record every DNS request from every department for a long time. That allowed us to go back and almost rewind the video recorder, show my age, to sort of go back and literally see day by day what was happening and what was working. And then that allowed us to go into organisations as well then and work with them. Again, sometimes they have the right tooling, sometimes they had the right capabilities. But in the end, we could really sort of recreate the entire cycle and what had happened in a large number of public sector organisations. We also have a host-based monitoring that we've talked about, and it's a project we do jointly with our Canadian colleagues. And that, again, is something that is deployed across public sector desktops and servers. It gives us effectively a host-based way of looking for odd behaviour. And so when new tradecraft is discovered, we can immediately roll that out. And every day that we're seeing new capabilities that the adversary is using, we can apply that and we can look for that capability. So those are sort of two examples where some of that capability has a sort of primary purpose almost, which is that automatic defence. But actually, when we're dealing with incidents, it's just an absolute goldmine for us in terms of helping us get on top of things quickly.
And presumably that.
Can I just really quickly follow on that? So I think the other thing that's really important about the ACD stuff, and we didn't do this well to start with, and we're starting to retrofit this back, is they all work together. And this goes exactly back to what Chich was saying before about the industry kind of confining consumers to silos. And so you buy my stuff and only my stuff, and I'll never work with Chich's stuff because he's bad. The ACD approach, I think, has shown that sharing that data between the different services actually multiplies the value of each one individually. And I just think it's kind of eating our own dog food again, right? We say people should share, that services should work together, that defensive products should work together. We're refactoring our own now so that they do it much better.
Fantastic. And presumably that not only protects the public sector, as you say, but also gives us an insight into the adversarial behaviour in a way that actually helps us to unravel the problem more broadly.
Yeah, I think that's it. And so, again, I talked about sort of the relationship with the private sector as well. And, that gives us an element of the picture and the jigsaw. Industry on SolarWinds also had some really rich data that they could do analysis on, and then you're collaborating on the results. You're kind of trying to piece together that tradecraft to say, okay, what's the totality of the tradecraft that we're seeing there? And I think again, a lot of that work goes into things like the advisory that we put out last week, that again talked about a whole set of developing what we call TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures that the adversary sort of follows, and also tries to frame that in a consumable, recognised way. So we use the MITRE attack framework, increasingly a really sort of important standard for the industry to help people understand exactly how adversaries are working, but do it in a repeatable way. So certainly sort of being able to see that and then also understand how their tactics are changing over time is really important.
Fantastic. I mean, the partnership in that, as you say, is fantastic. But I mean, Ian, tell us a bit about the partnership we need in future. What is government's role in terms of shaping the market for this kind of the things we need to defend against this in the future?
So we buy a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think if we start to ask for some basic things as part of that supply contract, I think we can start to shift the market and show, not only incentivize vendors to do the right thing, and reward those that do it well. I mean, that's the thing. They don't get a reward at the moment. We need to change that. But also show that there is actual protective value and business value in doing that. And I think we're starting to try and do that with the draft telecom security bill that's going through Parliament at the moment. One of the things we're asking is for vendors into the UK's telecom CNI to publicly declare they do some basic stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Seems obvious,
and,
right?
Right, and we'll find out whether they do or don't as we take their products apart, or as security researchers do it, or as as operators do it. I think trying to take that model and getting people to be honest about what they do and why we ask for it, rather than over-regulating, I think would be bad in this space. It would drive innovation down. It would be you'd fix yesterday's problem rather than tomorrow's problem.
Right.
But I think getting a set of really clear, objective things that isn't a government sales tax like some of the old assurance schemes we used to do. We don't want to go back there. We want to say, do you do these really basic things? Do you protect your CI and CD pipeline the way we say on our website? Do you run your own network the way we say on our website, or equivalently? Does the product come compiled with some basic anti-exploitation things? Those sorts of statements of fact that are either yes or no and are provable would be really interesting. I think that would start to incentivise the right kind of behaviour.
I mean, that's kind of consistent with what we're asking in the Internet of Things space as well. Like, that I can buy a plug off Amazon and be confident that not only will it not blow up when I plug it in, but it'll do it safely, right? So
yeah, we'll make sure it blows up safely.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Sorry. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the difference is that for big enterprises, you'd expect them to consume information and do really subtle risk management in their business context. For consumers, a lot of them just want to know, is it going to work safely? Is it going to do it right? And that's what the consumer regulation is for. But the principle, I think, is identical.
Brilliant. So quick question then to both of you. You asked Sudhakar whether he was optimistic or not. So the question to both of you, are you optimists?
Most of all, I've been in this business over 30 years. The first job I was given was to build a provably secure computer system, operating system. You will note we haven't managed to do that. I was given 2 books. One was The Cuckoo's Egg, and one was a book by a guy called Maury Gasser, which is How to Build a Secure Computer System. That was the title. Everything that Maury wrote in the late 80s about how to build a secure computer system is still true.
Yep.
And all the flaws that Clifford Stoll talks about in The Cuckoo's Egg are still happening. So I could look at that in a fairly pessimistic way. I'm actually quite optimistic. I think it does feel like we're at a point of inflection. I do think that there are certainly good examples where we are shifting the dial. I do think in a lot of corporate entities now, certainly the organisations we work with, there is real improvement. You can really, having been around that long, you can really actually see the shift and the interest in this. And so I think if you take a day-to-day snapshot, and it can feel really sort of quite, certainly in my job, the incident side, quite pessimistic. But actually, I think if you step back, we are massively making a difference and having an impact.
Ian, optimist or pessimist?
Well, those of you that know me know I'm a complete optimist all the time. I am actually quite optimistic about this. I think there's 3 big things for me. So the first one is we're starting to go after some of the underlying sort of systemic problems. So if you look at things like buffer overflows, they've been around since 1972. We're finally designing a processor that fixes them under the Digital Secure by Design program under DCMS with the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, with ARM, Microsoft, Google, all working together to try and fix a fundamental thing that's been around for nearly 50 years that there's been no incentive to fix before. So that's the first thing. Second thing is we're getting much better at automation and data gathering. And so I think we can take some of the pain away from people. So when they say it's hard, but the machine's doing it now, and we can leave them to do the stuff that Chich needs them to do on the really special stuff. And the third reason I'm optimistic is because the pub's open properly in 6 days.
And we note that your mood has distinctly improved as lockdown has eased.
Absolutely.
So and I'm an optimist, I think, because I have such a fantastic team and I'm really lucky to be leading such a fantastic organisation. So thank you very much indeed to both of you for the conversation and look forward to the rest of the day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.